not trigger any sort of an explosion. Firefighters say they expect that this rescue operation will be going on all night. They are again using dogs to search the rubble. 2 more bodies have been pulled out from the rubble here, but the body count, the number of people who tragically died here still stands at 14. Some of the bodies still remain inside. But this very specially trained crew now getting to work here, trying to see if they can, very carefully searching, find more victims. And of course, the hope is that they might be able to find someone who is still alive and be able to save them. Now, while we look at the situation here, this collapsed building just around the corner, while an apartment building did sustain a lot of damage, it was a very different story. And I talked with that apartment manager earlier this afternoon. Here's what he had to say.
I was trying to cover my 3-year-old boy, and I was on the first floor, apartment number 3.
I feel another aftershock. Do you feel
Yes,
that?
it sure did. Maybe it's better for us to move a little bit further.
Move away from the building a little bit. So you're trying to protect your 3-year-old son as you feel your apartment shake.
That's right, that's right. And I play, as they say, a Superman today, busting doors, trying to get the elderly people out. I had a lot of people trapped inside the building. Some cabinet falling on their bed, wouldn't be able to get up. We had our handful. Luckily, we didn't have any fatality or injury.
I'm going to ask Jim Toten to pan over and show us some of the damage here sustained at your apartment complex. What is the name of this complex?
Citronia.
And do you have quite a few elderly people or a mix of people of all ages here?
Probably 20% elderly people.
Did any people die here?
No, thank God, no. No fatality.
Any serious injuries?
No serious injury, just minor injuries, cut and bruises.
What about this apartment? As far as you can tell, will the residents be able to move back in, or is there going to be some major work needed here?
There is a major work. Building and safety, without a doubt, will come over, survey, do their preliminary investigation. If they feel the building is safe, they will go ahead and move back in.
Now, I'm sure you're aware that just around the corner at the Northridge Meadows apartment complex, the building collapsed. We already have 14 confirmed deaths. Yet your building doesn't seem to have sustained nearly as much damage. Are you surprised by the amount of damage at that other complex?
Very much so. This is by far the worst magnitude of any disaster. I have lived through a war. This is by far doesn't even come close. It's very unfortunate and very sad and very heartbreaking to see the magnitude of the disaster.
You've been listening to an interview we did earlier today with the manager of an apartment building located just around the corner, Ben Nimatzadeh. And very surprising, even though his building did sustain a lot of damage, nothing of the tragedy that we are seeing here at the Northridge Meadow Apartments. Again, the search for survivors beneath the rubble expected to go on all night.
Willa, before we leave you for a few moments, so then what is the death toll there at that location?
14 confirmed dead, and the search continues for more who may be trapped.
What is the evidence that exists that there may be more people trapped? Is it just that there are people missing, known missing?
Firefighters have not really given us any answers on that, because we were asking, what hope do you have that there may be some survivors amidst the rubble? And they said, well, you know, some people have been able to survive trapped in such terrible circumstances for 24, even 36 hours.
Oh, yeah, we have, I know there were earthquakes in the Philippines and Mexico City where people survived for a week. Yeah. But I was wondering if there's any indication, is what I meant, that there still are. I mean, obviously, they must continue looking. But do we have indications that maybe there are people in there?
We have not had any. I can't really answer that question, Hal. To be very upfront, I really don't know what the answer to that is, and they have not given us any indication of that at their many briefings, and that's something I'll be glad to follow up with them.
Remember the story of the one guy who was caught in the pancaked Nimitz Freeway up in the Bay Area in that quake, who they didn't get out for about a week. Now, he died a couple of weeks after he was recovered, but he lived for a long time, practically pancaked in about 12 inches of space.
That's right.
Yes, so sometimes there can be enough space to sustain life, and we hope they certainly do find some more survivors in that apartment building in Northridge. Thank you, Willa.
Oh, Larry, let me mention tomorrow the Santa Monica Public Schools will be closed.
Okay.
We've just received word about that. The Malibu Public Schools also be closed. UCLA will be closed tomorrow, but USC will be open, which probably reveals the difference in the proximity to the epicenter of those two distinguished universities.
Yep.
And the Visitation School in Westchester will be closed tomorrow.
As will all of the schools in the Los Angeles Unified School District be closed tomorrow until they can make an assessment of the earthquake damage. And St. Casimir School, elementary and junior, the Westchester Lutheran Preschool, the Louisville High School, the Loyola High School, the Oaks Elementary School, and the Adat Ariel Private School. Those are some of the schools that we've been told will be closed tomorrow.
Also, the Beverly Hills Unified School District will be closed tomorrow, but that is for students. Just for students.
Only for students.
Yeah, teachers are asked to come in if they possibly can.
Okay. At any rate, I think it will be a good idea, and if you didn't hear the name of your school mentioned, that you call the school before you either take your kids to the school tomorrow or before you dispatch them to school, because there is every possibility that the school will not be in session.
Well, let me mention, Larry, of course, that Cal State Northridge, of course, which is very close to the epicenter, that will be closed tomorrow. However, they are asking that all students, teachers, and onlookers stay away, but they do need all security, police officers, physical plant workers, electricians, plumbers, etc., to show up for work tomorrow to try to get the university back in operation. Let's go now to Jan Carl, who's at Caltech. Jan?
Okay, Hal. Actually, we have the latest figures now. The latest one was at 5:54, I believe, and that was at a magnitude 2.8 magnitude. In just a few moments, they'll have another briefing, and we will hear from Dr. Kate Hutton once again. And also, I don't know if you heard earlier, we will also have Dr. Kerry C. He's a Caltech earthquake geologist, and he was one of the geologists earlier today that was over the earthquake area in a helicopter. Although Dr. C said that from the air, and he said once again they were at about 300 feet over the ground, they did not see any kind of breakthrough from this particular fault, but they said that all day long they've had ground crews out, and so hopefully we'll hear back from those ground crews later tonight, hopefully, in terms of whether they've seen anything from a ground level that they didn't catch from overhead in the helicopter. One thing that was interesting earlier today that both Dr. Hutton and Dr. Jones mentioned to us, that if someone had said to them yesterday that there's going to be a 6.6 magnitude earthquake somewhere in the Los Angeles basin, they said they might have predicted San Bernardino, even the Pasadena area, Palm Springs, or Barstow might have been the four most likely areas. And again, going on what kind of seismic activity has been going on there in the last several months, and said that this one was sort of a surprise to them, since those would have been the areas that they might have guessed. They said if you look back over the past, say, decade, that the south side of the Los Angeles basin had most of the seismic activity, say, in the 30s and the 40s. And then interestingly enough, they said they had in the 50s and 60s, it was very quiet. And then the 70s, 80s, and now in the 90s, the northern side of the basin is the most active. I believe that Dr. Hutton is ready now to give us an update. So we will now hand it over to Dr. Hutton.
Okay, the update that we have, I have some information on the aftershocks that were felt within the last couple of hours. The largest one at 4:43 was 5.0. I'm sure most of you felt that one. We don't have any other seismological news except that aftershocks are continuing. And we seem to be getting a little bit more control over where the depth is of the earthquakes, the aftershocks. So they seem to be north of the main shock, in other words, that direction on this cross section, and a little bit shallower. So we're looking at probably one of these two structures. And Dr. Kerry C. has got some more comments to make on the geology, and then we'll go to questions after that. Kerry.
The information we have now that we didn't have 3 hours ago is that some of the oil company geologists have been telling us or educating us on some of the structures that they've seen in years past in the oil fields to the west of the earthquake location today. And they seem to think that there's a chance that it's on the Oatridge Fault extension, which comes in. It's one of the faults we talked about 3 hours ago, the Fru Fault. One of these structures here, those structures are seen in the oil fields to the west of and north of the main shock, and may in fact be a local name for a fault that we've known for a long time called the Oatridge Fault, which serves as the southern boundary of the Ventura Basin, one of the largest basins in Southern California. If it's true that this is a eastern extension of the Oatridge Fault, then it's a piece of a very major fault in Southern California that runs all the way out toward Ventura and then offshore into the Santa Barbara Basin.
Which fault is that?
That would be the Oatridge Fault. So
No,
the local name, it would be in this orientation, and it actually people had thought that it might be inactive because in places it's clearly overridden. Beginning about 3 million years ago, it began to be overridden by these mountains on the Santa Susana Fault. Clearly, if this is the structure that broke, it's not inactive.
Well, that's another thing we seem to be learning a little bit more about over the last several years. That some of the faults that we either perceived or we thought were inactive are in fact active. They're not dead yet.
We're definitely on the steep part of the learning curve.
And what does that say in terms of overall earthquake activity, not on the San Andreas, because we've always thought that's our worst case scenario, an 8+ on the San Andreas. But what does it say about more 6.5s, if you will, directly under the Los Angeles basin?
Well, one of you asked the question a few hours ago about whether this occurred on a small fault or whether it occurred on a large fault. And I think the difference now, David, is that it may well be that the structure that moved this time is a small part of a larger system that continues well to the west, tens of kilometers out toward Ventura and then offshore into the basin. So your question, I guess, was we're learning a lot about smaller structures in the LA Basin. Whittier Narrows was one patch of a small structure, well, large for us here in the basin. This may also be a small patch of a larger structure. So there are clearly more sources now that we know of in the LA Basin than there were 10, 12, 15 years ago.
Dr. C, I have a question here. On the map here we've drawn, we've got the Devonshire Fault here on the left, and then the Frew Fault. Where would the Oatridge Fault be according to this map?
The suggestion I have from the one oil company geologist who faxed me some information recently, he's been feverishly working in his home up in the Bay Area, and he would put the he would draw it like this. Now realize this is not the.
Half the cameras can't see you.
Should I become transparent? Or move over here?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Now this half can't. I do.
He draws it something like that, okay? And what they see in the Aliso Canyon oil field to the west of here, several kilometers, is the structure coming up like this and being overridden by the Santa Susana Fault. So I've forgotten the question exactly.
Oh, just if we could see, if we could redraw on this map,
Okay.
say in relation to those other two
What I
faults.
was saying before, this would have been the Frew Fault on the from the 3 o'clock briefing. What this fellow is suggesting is that it is actually the same thing as the Oatridge.
Okay.
It's a much
And-
larger fault as the Oatridge.
This would be a local name for the same fault, the same fault system.
The aftershocks, the way they are patterning out, I guess that's not grammatically correct, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The way they are kind of lining up. Does that support this Oatridge or Frew fault system?
Well, I'll speculate. Kate was mentioning that the aftershocks are all, they're very extensive over here. She's thinking now that they're a little more shallow. One possibility, and this is purely speculative, but if they really are all shallow, it might be that we had a few meters or a few yards of, for those of you who aren't able to speak meterese yet, say we have a couple of meters here, say 5 or 6 feet. If that had to die out before it got to the surface, you can imagine the tremendous stress concentrations around the tip of this crack. So it may well be that some of these earthquakes, if they are shallow, are being produced by this crack tip, which couldn't make it to the surface.
Is it fair to say that then it might have affected the Santa Susana Fault, and the Santa Susana Fault might be responsible for some of the aftershocks, or no?
Well, another thing that might support this is some of the aftershock locations have shown up to be quite a bit further west than this, out into almost to Simi Valley, and that might indicate that the rupture actually went to the west. So we're still looking into that, but that's a possible.
How shallow are the shallowest of the aftershocks, or do you have depths here?
Well, we're looking at an average of 4 or 5 kilometers, so compared to about 14-kilometer depth main shock.
How many of the 5 points have you had so far?
We've had about 5, magnitude 5 plus.
Now, the one that was
aftershocks,
5.5, there was some discussion about whether it was 5.5 or 5.3. Did we decide?
Actually, 5.3 is the correct magnitude. They forgot to update me on it, so I gave you the
But still, that was a very
conflicting
strong
information.
earthquake, and we expect more for those?
That was the largest aftershock so far. And I think to be on the safe side, we definitely have to consider the possibility of having more 5s in the sequence.
What would be the possibilities, do you think, at this point?
Well, it may be less than 50% chance, but it's still a significant chance. that we would have another 5 in the sequence within the next
Or
week.
Dr.
Yes.
Hunt or Dr. C, could you back up for a second for us and explain again what we're talking about with this new fault that you're now hearing about from oil company geologists, this Oatridge Fault? What does it all mean?
There was a period in California history back before any of us were around, in fact, before humankind evolved into humankind, about 3 million years ago. Up to 3 million years ago, there were a series of basins in Southern California. One of them was in the LA, they were in the LA region, they're in the Ventura region, and they were formed by faults moving like this. Okay, this surface moved down, okay, and so this would be a deep basin relative to the shoulders, all right? Now, this fault that we're looking at here was one of these faults, but because it was run up a ramp, like it was sitting over here, it ran up this ramp, it was tilted into this position. So we now have this fault, which used to be going this way, it's been rotated like that, and now it's become a reverse fault like this, okay? So this fault is a very ancient fault, but it's in the last few million years, it's been turned into what we call a reverse fault, where the motion is south over north.
You thought this fault was inactive. Now that you think it's not inactive or active, what does that mean?
No, we didn't think it was inactive before. If it's the Oatridge Fault, we've known the Oatridge Fault is active for many years, since as long as I've been a scientist. Okay?
You're talking about shallow earthquakes where the Oatridge Fault meets the Santa Susana Fault. What's the implication of that?
Well, you know, it's funny, when you take a class as an undergraduate in the old days, you'd learn that faults, if one fault cut another fault, that meant that fault was younger, okay? You know, it's the law of cross-cutting relationships, but we're finding more and more, this is true at Landers as well as here perhaps, that faults can both be active and they can seem to interpenetrate, or they can come right up to each other and stop.
Have the aftershocks slowed any?
It's complicated.
Or are they still really pounding us?
Oh, yes, they have slowed quite a
They have
bit.
slowed.
Yeah, they have slowed
Okay.
quite a bit. But, well, compared to this morning, I mean, if you look at the records over there, the records were black this morning, and there's actually quite a bit of white space between them now. And they will probably slow more during the night and into tomorrow.
But still don't breathe too big a sigh of
But
relief. Wait
in
for
our,
another 5.
right, it's still a good possibility of having another magnitude 5 aftershock, right?
Where's the Oatridge in relationship to the Devonshire?
I don't really know that for the present time. These are about in the same place. Okay, they're in the same basic fault zone. Okay, the Devonshire is up in the mountains and it dips also to the south steeply. This one dips steeply to the south as well. So right now, I think they might be part of the same fault zone. I'm not intimately familiar with the oil field geology over there, so we're going to need some help from the other geologists in the next couple of days.
But doesn't it make a difference if they are, which fault it is, and because that could make a difference in whether or not you have breaking along the whole area, or just simply in one?
It probably doesn't make any great difference whether it's you know, this fault or this fault for most of us. Whether it's this fault or this fault, it makes a huge difference. And what Kate was saying is that given the possibility of shallow locations now, it may be that we favor this location, this steeper fault.
Doctor, if you could, for Channel 7, we just came live to you.
What he was explaining is.
Read theorize, if you will, why you think that
Lower of
the fault that caused this quake is now called the Oatridge Fault.
There have been there's been an oil company geologist who's called us up and faxed us some information, and he's pointed out to us that in the oil fields just to the west of this area, there is a fault called the Santa Susana, which 3 million years ago began to override this structure. And this structure can be traced in the oil fields all the way out toward Ventura, all the way to the south end of the Ventura Basin, and all the way offshore into the Santa Barbara Basin, which is, you know, where the ocean is right now. So so what he's suggesting is that this major structure, which we know is major to the west, may in fact continue over into this area and be what we were calling a few hours ago the Fru Fault.
Okay, so
Maybe the same thing.
What does that tell you about the intensity, or what does that tell you about the fault that caused the quake?
Well, it tells us that it may be a larger, more regional fault and not just a very local, small fault. So it may continue for tens of kilometers all the way offshore.
Potential of being far greater than a 6.6.
Well, if this is the case, it would make it more like the Whittier Narrows earthquake, which occurred on a very small patch of a much bigger fault, and only that's.
Okay, once again, we've been listening to Dr. Carrie C., Caltech earthquake geologist, and also Dr. Kate Hutton giving us the latest update. And they will give us another update, and as soon as they do, we'll come back to you, and now back to you in the studio.
Okay, Jen, we'll be back to you with further developments from Caltech, but we want to go out to that important rescue operation, that crucial search and rescue operation. It's going on in the Northridge area, and to Willa Sandmeyer. Willa?
Hal, members of the urban search and rescue team who arrived about an hour ago and began unpacking their specialized equipment are now going into action. We're going to show you pictures of what's going on here right now. Some firefighters still going through. That is actually a second level apartment, if you can believe that. That is not a ground floor unit. That is a second level apartment. And some of these urban search and rescue teams now going in with dogs to try to see if they could possibly locate more victims. Of course, their hope is to locate someone who would be alive and be able to save them, but they're searching for victims nonetheless. A few minutes ago, I talked with Gregory Gonzalez. He's a member of the urban search and rescue team, and he described what's going to be involved in the search here. Situation.
We've been sending the dogs on the bottom floor, getting them as far into the building as they possibly can, hoping that if they come across any humans that they will alert by barking.
And do you think there's any hope that you might be able to find survivors?
There's always hope. In a collapsed structure, there's a lot of voids where the walls haven't collapsed completely. People can be protected if they're low enough that furniture can hold up walls and ceilings.
Gregory, when you refer to a void, you mean there's just enough space where someone might be able to hole up if they were crouched down?
Right, and there's always hope there's people in there.
Now, in this situation, is there any indication that firefighters have given you from people who are missing, that there are people still trapped inside, living or dead?
They have no idea. We just look.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, you were listening to Gregory Gonzalez. He's a member of the urban search and rescue team. You see the coroner's van here, and just while we were on the air here, another body has been loaded into the van. Another body removed from the rubble here at the Northridge Meadows apartment complex. This is where the entire building collapsed down on the first floor. In some cases, leaving a crawl space of just 18 inches left on those first floor apartments. This is a rescue operation that firefighters tell us is going to be going on all night. They still hold out hope that they might be able to find some survivors, and they're not going to leave here until they're satisfied that they have carefully searched all of the rubble and that no one remains beneath it. So again, this operation going on all night, and now federal assistance here from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA sent in members of that urban search and rescue team. They're going in now with their dogs, and they're hoping that they may be able to find more people inside. Reporting live from Northridge, I'm Willa Sandler.
So we must assume then, Willa, that there are some people who are still missing and unaccounted for.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear your question.
We must assume that there are some people from that apartment complex who are unaccounted for.
Well, that could very well be. That could very well be. We've had people stop by here and ask us about friends they had who had apartments on the first floor. And there really is no one individual person here who can tell you all the names of who the residents were, the names of those who died here, and the names of those who are missing. There's not one individual person like that handing out that information.
I guess there's not an apartment manager who could do that, huh?
Well, at least they have not been provided to worried families who have come here or to the news media. Because I've had families ask me, well, what should I do? And I try to find a firefighter or a Red Cross official, and they recommend they go to a shelter to see who has checked in. Because people, as people were helping each other get out, those who were able-bodied, those who were not trapped, some then went to shelters or went to stay with families or friends who had homes that were not damaged. So those people didn't leave an accounting of where they went. So this is a kind of a jumble of things going on here, and people trying to track down others to find out if they're safe.
Okay, well, we'll be getting back to you. We do want to mention that obviously some businesses and commercial institutions will be getting back to business tomorrow, but there are many school closures, and we want you to be aware of those. Larry, I think you have some of those?
Schools in the Los Angeles Unified School District will all be closed tomorrow while the quake damage is being assessed. So if your kids go to any of the schools in the LA Unified School District, they will be out of school tomorrow. Among some of the other schools, at St. Casimir School, that's an elementary and junior high, closed. Westchester Lutheran Elementary and Middle School, closed, as are Louisville High School and Crossroads School, all reporting to us that they will be closed tomorrow. Loyola High School, closed tomorrow, and the Oaks Elementary School will also be closed tomorrow. As you heard, and adult Ariel Private School will also be closed tomorrow. You heard Hal say earlier that UCLA tells us they will be closed tomorrow But USC, on the other hand, will be open for class tomorrow. And what did you say about Cal State Northridge, which is close to the epicenter?
Yeah, Cal State Northridge is closed for students and for teachers, but they do want maintenance workers, security workers to show up to try to get the institution operating once again.
Okay.
Okay, Larry, did we have that? Oh,
yes, we did.
We had a question from a viewer who called in and said, is there any possibility that this quake is related to, remember the Santa Monica quake that we had about a week ago?
During the football game.
Almost a swarm of quakes. Yeah. Well, maybe that's something we can find out by going over to Jan Carl at Caltech. Maybe she can ask one of the experts there rather than our non-professional speculation. Jan, can you possibly get a question like that in?
Well, tonight it'll be as the geodesists measure the benchmarks and see what the deformation has been, as the geologists check more carefully than we have today on the ground, and as the seismologists refine their locations and their aftershocks, that we'll get a better idea of what really happened today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Carrie?
It may be my last one. I'm not sure. I think there's one planned for 9, isn't there, Kate?
Jan, do you hear us?
Yes, I sure do.
Please, we had a question from a viewer who wants to know, could this be related in any way to the Santa Monica earthquake that took place about a week ago, or those swarm of quakes?
Okay, let me grab Dr. Hutton. Dr. Hutton, if I may ask you, we've got a viewer that's called in wanting to know if this in any way could be related to the earthquakes that were occurring out in the Santa Monica area last week.
Okay, well, at the moment, we don't know of a physical connection, but we want to look into it. You know, it seems a little bit unusual that the week before a magnitude 6.6 quake, we should have magnitude 3s only about 20 miles away. But I think it'll be very difficult to prove it statistically if they are related, because anytime we have a magnitude 6.6 earthquake, we can always look the week before and see magnitude 3 somewhere. And since that's not a completely quiet, Santa Monica Bay is not a quiet area, it has magnitude 3s fairly commonly. The chances that it could occur by statistical fluke is, they're reasonable. So it may be very difficult for us to prove whether or not they were physically related or not.
So the answer may be yes, maybe no, and we may never know.
We'll never know.
Yeah, I want to recap on something because we broke away for a few moments during this particular briefing, something that Dr. Carrie C. was going over, in that a lot of people growing up in Southern California grew up fearing the San Andreas Fault and the big one occurring there. But we were talking about the fact that we've learned a great deal over the last 6 or 7 years about the fault system within the basin. Could we sort of recap that for us?
Okay, well, the San Andreas Fault is still considered to be the big ogre of Southern California's earthquake faults. It produces the largest earthquakes, probably about magnitude 8, every century and a half or 2 centuries. And also those earthquakes affect a very wide area, and they would be more of a hazard to the lifeline systems and infrastructure than probably this one was, because they would cut off the power coming in, they would cut off the aqueducts and whatnot. So even though the major metropolitan areas are a little bit farther away from the San Andreas, we still consider that to be the worst overall possibility. But that only happens every century and a half. And in the meantime, we have a magnitude 6+ earthquake every few years, 6.5 every 10 years, say, somewhere in Southern California. And we are getting so populated that there's hardly any place you can put an earthquake like that without causing damage now. So maybe the smaller quakes deserve just as much consideration as the big one on the San Andreas. And especially if it's under a population center like Los Angeles, it really behooves us to know as much as possible about what could happen in order to be prepared for it.
I know that there'll be weeks and months and years of analyzing the Northridge earthquake, but what does it tell you initially as someone who studies these for a living. And has it told you anything immediately that, wow, we didn't know this, or this proves this is what we were thinking?
Well, it's mainly tantalizing possibilities today because I've been in the press room all day. I haven't had a chance to look at the data. But I think the possibility that the Oatridge Fault goes through and connects with faults in the northern San Fernando Valley, that's fascinating. Ventura Basin is a place that's not very well studied except by the oil company geologists, and they don't think about earthquakes. So getting the data, all the information that's known together by different people together, that could be very fascinating.
Has there been much coordination in the past between, say, the Caltech seismologists and the oil company geologists?
There has been since the Whittier Narrows earthquake, because they had speculated about the existence of that fault before the Whittier Narrows earthquake, and the data is becoming less proprietary now. It's older, and they're beginning to. There's less economic value in the oil within Los Angeles Basin, so they're beginning to come out with the information, and. So beginning in '87, yeah.
Jan, a question from here.
Hal has a question. Go ahead, Hal.
One quick question. Dr. Hutton mentioned about the major quake, the big one that occurs every 150 years on the San Andreas Fault. How many years has it been since the last one took place?
Well, this is a question to Dr. Hutton that actually I can answer. This is the only time it's going to happen, so I'm going to take advantage of it because actually, Dr. C just mentioned it's been 137 years as of last week. That's correct, since there was a earthquake on the San Andreas Fault.
In January 9th, 1857.
So we're up to 137, and the average is about 150 years?
Right, something like that.
And where, Jan, where was the epicenter of that quake? Do they know?
Do you know where the epicenter on that particular quake was?
Well, we didn't have instruments at all at that time, so just based on the damage, we know that the fault ruptured from the Carrizo Plain, which is near Parkfield, all the way down almost to Wrightwood, or to Wrightwood, and probably started on the Parkfield end. So it probably started at Parkfield.
Okay.
So that was 137 years ago?
Yes, that was 137 years ago as of January 9th.
Okay. And is Dr. Hutton concerned at all about the triggering of seismicity, as Dr. C said?
Earlier, when we were talking to Dr. C, he mentioned the possibility of actually, I believe that was when we were talking to Dr. Jim Dolan. Dr. Dolan mentioned the possibility of triggering seismicity. That was a term that I think made Hal a little nervous, and maybe a few people throughout Southern California. Is there any way of taking a look at today's earthquake and predicting how it might increase seismicity in the area?
Okay, well, yeah, we can figure out. Once we figure out exactly what part of the fault moved how far, then we can figure out what effect it had on the other faults, including this one down here and this one up here, and so forth. And we can tell if the clock was set ahead in certain areas or if it was set back. I mean, it could be to the advantage of some areas and the disadvantage of other areas, like the Landers earthquake, for example. But it's sort of like adding another straw to the camel's back when you don't know how much it's already carrying and you don't know how strong it is. So it's not going to give us any earthquake predictions.
Because I think a lot of people at home often say, well, I wonder if this one is going to release stress, that's good, or is it going to increase stress somewhere else?
Okay, well, every earthquake always relieves stress, but it also redistributes it. So locally, it could be increased in some areas.
And that's the key, is predicting.
Jan, tell Dr. Hutton that this earthquake didn't increased our stress.
It increased stress. It
Hal
definitely
and Larry are both saying that this particular earthquake definitely increased stress throughout the Southland. But I think of the human nature kind.
Definitely in the seismological laboratory. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hutton, so much. Once again, that's the latest update here from Caltech. Again, the aftershocks are occurring at less frequency than they were earlier. That's what has been expected. But we have had at least, I think, 4 and possibly 5 aftershocks that have been at least 5.0 or greater. Again, that isn't anything that they did not expect. The last prediction that they have at this point in time is saying that the chance for having a 5.0 or greater is still 1 in 2, and they are still sticking with that. That could last as long as a week, that 1 in 2 prediction, although they said they will look at all the information and they'll update that again probably in 2 days, possibly 3 days.
Jan, the last one we have, and correct us if we're wrong, was at 5:54, and we were told that was at 2.8. Does that jibe with your information?
I'll tell you what, Larry, I'm going to step over here for just a second and check it. So
Okay.
And Dave's going to pan up here with me. These computers are pretty accurate here. The last one we have was actually at 6:20, and that was a 2.5. There was one at 6:18, a 2.8. At 6:15, 2.9. As you can see, these were occurring quite frequently.
Yes, I see.
Well,
Yeah.
Jan, you know, judging by our lights all around that we've been pointing to, we haven't had them moving for quite a while, which gives us some cause for optimism.
That's true. In fact, the last 3.0, Hal, was at 5:45. That was the last one that was at 3.0.
Okay, Jan, do stand by there. We'll be getting back to you shortly. We want to go to Jennifer York, who I understand is over Mission Hills. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yes, Hal, we're flying over the Mission Hills area where this structure fire is burning on a small street called Midwood Drive. It's just north of Rinaldi Street, just west, about a half a block west of the 405. What is working here is a result, we believe, of the continued aftershocks that have been occurring all afternoon and early evening. Apparently, the structure next to the one that is on fire experienced some extensive damage done to the structure and the gas line. And sure enough, this home next door or apartment complex, it's very tough to say because it is so dark out here, it's just completely ablaze. Now, I've also been told, and I've also experienced, watching City Fire, their air units do some night water drops. They train particularly for this type of assistance to the fire department, and they're actually doing night water drops on this fire. This is really unusual. You don't see this too often. We also experienced this morning over the mobile home park, but usually they allow the ground units to try and tackle this. But as you can see, this is a huge fire. It looks as if it is an apartment complex. And so at this point, just one apartment complex is burning. Again, this is Midwood Drive, just north of Rinaldi, west of the 405. I can tell you there are quite a few emergency crews on the scene, fire trucks, and also a couple of hook and ladders trying to tackle this fire. It is by no way under control. We're flying over the Mission Hills area. Back to you in the studio.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. We can definitely see that there is a vast section of the valley which indeed has not had power restored. That's virtually the same area that you showed us last time you came around.
That's right, Larry. This is the area of Mission Hills, Granada Hills, again, to the northern end of the 405, north of the 118 freeway. This entire area is blackened. There's some spots of some lights throughout the neighborhoods, but as you can see, overall...
Well, Jennifer,
yes.
from your perspective, I understand you landed to refuel.
Yes.
As you have gotten into the air once again, do you see any major difference? Can you tell that the valley and the city is coming back with more light, or does it look about the same as just before you landed?
It looks about the same, actually, Hal. It seems a bit about south of Victory Boulevard is where it seems most of the lights are, and a little bit to the east of the 405. But once you get about Sherman Way, north of Sherman Way, and also west of the 405, this whole entire area is still dark. That looks like a lot of lights, but it actually isn't. This is an expansive area right now that we're covering, showing you with our camera that is still black and just a couple lights here and there. But most of the homes, the majority of homes, still do not have lights in this portion of the valley.
And as you look over the Santa Monica Mountains and the Hollywood Hills, does it appear as though the city of Los Angeles looks normal or with the usual amount of light?
It looks about 3/4 of the way lit at this point. Did we just lose our picture for you?
No. Well, yeah, we don't have you on the picture.
Okay. Yeah, Hal, it looks as if maybe we've got about 50% of the area back with lights, especially the western portion of the to the west of the 405 is still really dark up here.
Okay, we'll get back to you in just a moment as soon as we reestablish video with you. But we want to show our viewers just the nature of the problem that took place earlier today. Larry, maybe you and I can look at this tape together. This was one of the major destructive areas that the earthquake was at the I-5 and the 14.
Yes.
Out in Sylmar.
Sylmar.
And as you can see, this is the result of what happened when the earthquake hit.
This was the one that hit the main quake at 4:31 this morning. And as you can see, the cars that were involved there, we thought earlier they might have been driven in, particularly the ones underneath for inspection, but those cars were all trapped there.
They were trapped, right.
The freeway just pancaked. It just fell apart.
And as we commented earlier, this looks precisely as it did 23 years ago, February 9th, 1971. The same structures, roughly in the same area, coming down disintegrating, creating this kind of cutoff between northern and southern California and impacting the entire economy. And which raises the question, and it hasn't been just raised by us, but by many, many individuals, why? What have we learned in 23 years? What went wrong? Why did this happen again? And didn't we learn by the lessons of 1971?
I know, because it seems that we have repeated, or nature has dealt us the same blow and it has the same result.
It is interesting, Larry, that it's almost identical in the magnitude of the quake. They were both roughly 6.6. One of them took place over the hills from Sylmar, just over the ridge.
Yes.
And it was felt, the impact was felt most of all in Sylmar in 1971. Here's Sylmar again in 1994. And as you can see, we're faced with roughly the same situation.
And you know, the destruction that we're seeing right now, the damage we're seeing right now, could well have an impact on the greater Los Angeles area for a long time. A lot of the primary arteries are running north and south up to the Mojave Desert, to Palmdale, Lancaster, Mojave, and down into Los Angeles, and then the one over on the Santa Monica side. Altogether, about 9 bridges have been destroyed. It has got to have a disruptive effect on the mobility of people here in Southern California, where mobility, particularly by car, is so very important.
Right. This is the main artery.
That's right.
And there's no traffic moving on I-5 because of this disaster.
And the only option that they have, I think I heard discussed earlier, maybe by one of our cameramen here, was a winding mountainous road that kind of skirts the intersection of the Antelope Valley Freeway and the 5.
Yeah, there is a truck bypass.
Yes.
But I'm not sure even if that truck bypass is open.
It may not be.
Yeah.
It may not be. And then, of course, we have the 10, the Santa Monica Freeway. That's going to cause just hordes of motorists to have to drive through the middle of the city to traverse the city from the west side downtown and back.
Then back.
Yes.
And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of vehicles.
That's right.
Every single day.
Going and coming.
That's right.
Down Wilshire, Olympic, Pico.
And remember, before the freeway, when Wilshire, Olympic, and Pico, as you mentioned, used to be the main arteries.
Yes.
We didn't have that number of cars.
No, that's oh no. We only have maybe 10%.
Probably
of the cars.
10% of that.
Yeah.
So lifestyles are going to change in Los Angeles as a result of this quake.
They said earlier today, when I say they, I mean the governor and some of the California highway engineers, in the report that we got from Steve Lenz, that it might take 6 months to perhaps a year. I think that's being highly optimistic.
Optimistic, right.
Yes. Yes.
Because there has to be strengthening. Yes. You can't use the access road from the Santa Monica Freeway to the 405 because they're not sure if that's going to hold up or come down any moment.
Yeah. And it also has to, just the curing process, the concrete and the steel and everything, it has to just sit and set for so long.
And Larry, the dollars involved, the taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill. And I don't care whether it's federal or state or local or a combination, the taxpayers ultimately are going to get the bite.
They're going to get the bite. And the other thing is, as John Garamendi, the state insurance commissioner, was saying when he was here with us in the studio earlier, although it's going to cost us a great deal to do it, it is something we cannot not do. We have to do it. So we have to bite the bullet and get it done.
That's right. Is Jennifer York available now? Did we get the video back from the helicopter?
Not yet.
Okay, no Jennifer York. Do we have, let's see, is Stan Chambers out there in the valley?
He was at Quimby Park the last time we talked to him, and it looked like a group of people who...
Oh, okay. They are going to show us that devastating fire that took place out in the Sylmar area in the trailer park.
Oh, yeah.
And that is something I think that in case you just joined us, you should see. This was as you can see, taken before sunup.
Yes.
Right after the quake hit at 4:31, and underground gas lines erupted, fires broke out, and this was the result.
It destroyed almost every residence in that trailer park. This is early this morning, perhaps 4:49, 10 minutes after the quake, and this eventually just ravaged this entire development of mobile homes. One of the things, Hal, I don't know whether we've even discussed this enough in light of today's quake and all the aftershocks, that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that there are all kinds of lines for transmitting all kinds of things beneath the streets of Greater Los Angeles. Oil, natural gas, electricity, all kinds of things. And when an earthquake, which disrupts the nice, smooth, angular path of those things and tears at them and causes them to spew
Well, that's
their
why
contents.
that's right. That's why there's no water out there. Water mains broke.
Yes.
And then also there's the problem with pollution.
That's right.
So you have to be very careful in just drinking the water, even if it's coming out of your faucet.
Yeah, we have been advising people earlier, and health authorities have been advising us to advise people that they should boil it for at least 10 minutes before you consume it when it comes out of the faucet.
Larry, I was going to mention that we are always concerned with earthquakes and fire.
Yes.
And, of course, the classic case being the great San Francisco earthquake, the early part of the century, when it was not really the earthquake that destroyed the city, it was the fire.
It was the fire, yes.
But we have, even though we are looking at this tragedy right here, there have been very few disastrous, I mean, you figure a city of over 400 square miles, just the city of Los Angeles.
Sure.
Forget the surrounding area and other cities, Culver City and Pasadena and everything else. But we have not seen the kind of rampaging fires that destroyed an entire city like it did in San Francisco.
No, that's true. There are a couple of reasons why, too. We have kind of, or we used to have, I don't know how true it is anymore, kind of wide open spaces here. In San Francisco, as everybody knows, the houses are built very close together. And in fact, they're adjoining each other so that it's very easy for fire to skip from one house to the other. Now, when the Chicago fire, the houses there were mostly wooden frame houses, which just went up like tinder. Supposedly started by Mrs. O'Leary's cow. In the San Francisco quake, though, as you recall, they went across on the Oakland Hills and watched the city burn because the houses built smacked against each other, just caused the conflagration, and virtually destroyed the city. They had to practically rebuild it. We've been making comparisons, Hal and I, between this quake this morning at 4:31 and the February 9th, 1971 Sylmar quake, or San Fernando quake as some call it. We're going to revisit that now with some scenes from our archives of February 9th, 1971. This was the Olive View Hospital, I believe.
Yeah, the sanitarium.
The sanitarium, which is where the vast majority of the fatalities occurred in the 71 quake.
You know, what's interesting about this one, Larry, is that this was the quake that was a number of miles away from the epicenter, and yet this was the area that was hit hardest.
It was.
And this was where most of the casualties took place.
As I recall, this particular sanitarium was relatively newly built. It hadn't been built that long.
That's correct. It's an interesting perspective. When you cover earthquakes over the years, even those in the interior, I remember in Central California, some of those that met earthquake codes, did not survive an earthquake. And some of those that were built back in 1910 or 1912 did just fine in the earthquake. And this was some of the rescue operations that took place.
On where the energy was dispersed to underneath the ground.
And you'll recall there was a great concern at that time about the Van Norman Dam.
There was.
As to whether that was going to hold up or
I can still remember Stan
flood the
Chambers
area.
standing out there doing the reports at the edge of the dam and telling us about the people down beneath the dam who were in some jeopardy there, as we could see a crack developing in the dam. Here we can see where a car has been smashed. These are the scenes you're looking at. You can probably tell by
yeah, let's mention
video.
this is 1971.
Yes.
Just to give you the perspective, February 9th, 1971, the earthquake hit at 5:59 in the morning, registering 6.6 on the Richter scale, just about what the earthquake today registered.
Yes, I think that's the Van Norman. Yes.
That's right.
Okay. So far, we're told the total fatalities here in 1961, as 1994, have been 27. That's the latest figure that we have. I think in the 1971 quake, 65 people lost their lives, some 40 of them at Olive View itself. If you don't remember, or perhaps if you weren't here at the time, there were any number of patients who were in the basement at that hospital or sanatorium. And when the quake hit and caved in on the basement, they simply had no chance.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
But they did rescue some, and that's the motivation for the big rescue operation that's taking place at Northridge Meadows Apartments.
Yes.
Because there is always hope that someone may have I guess you'd call it a little pocket of air.
Pocket of air.
Perhaps some furniture is holding up a wall, and maybe they have survived. They may not even be conscious, but there have been many, many cases of individuals pulled out of buildings in the earthquake in Mexico City, in the Philippines,
Yes.
and they
Sometimes
they have
days
survived
later.
for a week.
They pulled them out of the earthquakes in Siberia, which took thousands of lives. Sometimes if you're fortunate enough, or if you have your wits about you enough to get under a heavy, well-constructed table, that may be what saves your life. Now, this is particularly true, I think, in residences, as opposed to high-rise buildings and things like that. But we thought you would find it interesting to make a comparison between 1971, and I certainly remember that. I was about to enter a high-rise office building to go to work on a radio show. So that's indelibly etched in my mind, and compare that with what we all experienced this morning here in 1994.
I believe they were
4:30.
two different kinds of quakes. Wasn't this the thrust?
This is a thrust.
Yeah,
That was a slip strike.
Yeah, and the other one was a more of a rolling, because I lived in a high-rise apartment building at the time, and you know how dice are if you put them in a cup?